It's almost dead, so I have to charge it, and I'm going to work on what I was working on yesterday before I invented a magic wand. Um, and then I'll make notes and I'll explain it when my phone is more charged. Yeah. Okay, here are my notes. I started them last night with just this part. That's what gave me the idea for the magic wand. Because I looked at my video from last night, and every motion I did for each explanation of each part of this, so like flux, absence of, leftover, and existential, I did a different motion, and I sort of wrote them down, and that made me realize that different motions do different things, and so that gave me the idea for the wand thing. But it wasn't overly related yet to the time thing that we were doing as much. So I then created a beginning of a metaphysics that is a combination of those four variables. So this represents the flux or the specter, which fluctuates and changes over time, and its change creates in turn the change of matter from one position to another, or rotation, or any of these motions. Mind is a part of that specter because, like the motion of like just in a normal object like this pencil, the mind can control the motion of your hand by bending it without actually being not the mind, but like the self and the mind have an effect on that motion without being directly like, it's not the matter so much as it's more part of this flux kind of stuff. And that's why I then suggested that magic is able to modify the flux, and thus the motion of objects, which is why you encounter things after casting a magic spell or predicting futures. But how it works is it's basically just oh yeah, that's one more thing. The specter stuff isn't real. It's an absentine property, which means that it doesn't exist compared to the physical pen, which you can see. The distortions in the shadow of the pen are very subtle because it's on white, and because the lighting is different, do not exist according to a sort of physical reality, much like the mind and your thoughts are not a physical property either. But the motion of an object is the replacement of that fluctuation or that matter with another state in that fluctuation. So, I don't know if that makes sense. I'll try to explain it clearer as I go along. But this part with the magic and the mind and stuff doesn't actually explain how light and sound affect, in turn, the flux. So, as you can tell, in this lighting, the flux is barely visible. Like you can kind of see it in the shadow of this pen, and you can kind of see it when I look at the paper, but it's nowhere near as visible as it would be over here and compared to here. And like we can even compare it by putting the camera right here, and you can see it more so in this part compared to here, and it's a different color and is behaving slightly differently on this fabric. So, and also I can move this like this, and it changes the way the flux or the specter, using multiple words, but it's mostly the specter, changes with the motion of the other objects around it. So light affects the appearance of the flux, and so it changes the color. And in some ways, this also is true of light to begin with, because light changes the color of objects when you position them. So like, this is more of a white light. It doesn't change the color so much. But the light over there is more yellow. So everything underneath it has a lighter or a more yellow hue, which is another example of how light changes the state of an object. Because I brought sound into it when I added Stivex or Stywave, Stivex, that's another word. Sound changes the flux in the same way as vibration, or as it vibrates matter, which imitates the sound in relation to it. But we'll do a little bit of an experiment to show that, because I'm going to have to play sound, and I'm not going to play any music that has ownership by someone on it. So I'm going to have to build a song or something to show how it affects it. But once again, because it's absentine, it's very perceptibly that way, rather than identical, if that makes sense. Like, you can look at this stuff, or like, it's probably easier in the shadow of this bowl. But it, if I whistle, it sort of echoes the sound. The words create a vibration in that fluctuation, which is kind of visible. Like, if I say something and it's echoing in that flux, you can see that it changes as I speak. And when I'm silent, it goes away. Boo. It's not very evident, but which is why it's perceptively that way. Rather, it's more like in the pareidolia of the appearance that you will see that, rather than in the obvious sense. So it's kind of hazy in that sense. But what happens in general with both of those is that it changes the way the flux works. And the flux works by deconstructing the matter or the form of the object as it moves along, and reconstructs it at a different position. Like the form, not the atoms, because the atoms just move along. The form stays in its state. It's not destroyed, it's merely swapped with another position of that state. But this is kind of complicated, and I don't know if I explained it very well, and this is already 8 minutes long. So I'll be back after I try clarifying. If you've ever seen videos on sand and sound, you would know that sand, and technically any other particle of matter, is affected in motion by sound, by very microscopic amounts. And if we know anything about support, it's that depending on the position of something, the effect of that sound changes the support of an object by a very small amount compared to the the complete thing, but it alters the motion of it by a very microscopic amount, and it also depends on what you're using, because like a lighter object will have more of an effect in that sound than a heavier object. But like sound is literally a vibration of atoms in the air. It's not a real thing like light, which has a particle. It travels through particles, through vibration, and that's how it gets to your ear. It's like an echo. I don't know. It's a very simple explanation of sound. But sound has an effect on matter in its own unique fashion compared to light. But both are kind of a vibration, but like they both have frequency, not vibration. They both have a frequency, and depending on that frequency, the effect is different. That's why there's like low voices and high voices, because they're different frequencies of sound, and that's why you have darker lighting and brighter lighting and even brighter lighting, because it's a frequency of the two different things. There are a lot of colors. We can only see 4. No, we can't see 4. We can only see 3, unless you were born with an extra cone. Or not cone. One of the cones or the other one. We can hear quite a few sounds. We can actually hear more sounds than we can see colors. Which is interesting. But the effect of both causes matter to change in a diversity of ways, and we can control those things to create several different effects. And we will get into how light and sound create effect and how we can manipulate them, at least on a basic level, because I don't have that much technology. And we will relate that to time and to our gravity stuff from before, after we do a couple experiments, because why would I just stop doing experiments halfway through the week? Yeah. This is the rock from a previous video. It has several colors. I haven't touched it. It just changed a bit since we did the experiment. I may have put it in the liquid that was in that video again after I turned it off, but it also dried. That had an effect on how it looks. You can see that there's yellow portions on the stone. The way light changes it, like just because it's yellow here, if I put it under this yellow light, it becomes way more yellow in a very, or actually the yellow becomes less visible because the entire stone is yellower, if that makes sense. Like you can clearly see the yellow parts on this rock, which are not natural parts of the rock if you watched that other video, because it used to be gray. But in this lighting, the yellow is almost invisible. And in this lighting, it's totally different. The change in light changes the color and changes what details of the stone are visible. So that's an example of how light can easily change the appearance of something. We'll get to how that relates to its manipulation in a bit. But another example is one of my first videos was about the lady outside in the snow. She's no longer there because the snow melted, as you can see. But she wasn't actually in my perception of reality. She was only perceivable on camera because she was a lighting and shadow effect that was only visible from the angle of the camera and not from my perspective, which shows another example of light and object causing an appearance of something that wasn't visible any other way. So, yeah. I'm going to show you the exact same video twice, once without sound and once with sound. And you'll notice that the one with sound changes the way you perceive the motion of the magic wand, because it goes with the beat, and the beat is different in the silent video from the one where it is playing a song I made at one point. So the music changes what's focalized in the video. So you'll notice parts of the video that you didn't actually notice before, simply because there's a offbeat sound in the background that isn't always matching, because I made the silent video first and then I added sound to it after, so it makes it look weird, but you'll see. If you look at this tree, it still has leaves. Some of them are moving because of the wind. The reason it still has leaves will be explained in a second. Okay, so a leaf falls for one of two reasons. Either it fell because the wind blew it off, or it fell because the vibration shook it off. One, the wind is caused by the light. That is, depending on how the air is heated, it moves, and as such, it creates temperature, weather, and wind. But sound has a similar effect, but a very different effect, because if I do this, everything vibrates. Those two effects, while very subtle, have a very limited effect on the environment. As such, they affect coincidence without which many things wouldn't have their peculiar behaviors that we perceive often. If I'm quiet, you can hear it move. As we discussed, heat and echoes affect the flux and the specter and physicality. So if this is the specter and the mind and the perceptive, and this is the physical and the physicality, or the matter, they are not the same, but distinctive properties of what we call reality through some divide of difference. This is why we're using an aver, because they aren't a unity, which would be the third portion, the interactive portion between them. But you say that mind and matter are identical, because these three portions control the different places of things, and they're not always the same. Like, you can think a thought that has no effect on reality, but you can also think a thought that moves your hand, or you can think a thought of moving your hand without moving your hand. So mind, its transfer and its matter behave separately, but at least these two are affected by heat and the echoes or vibration. I like the word echo better because it fits with heat and echo compared to light and sound, because both have a sort of vibration, which is where frequency comes from, which is why using vibration there is confusing. Flux, or a specter, and I think there's a difference there because I wrote both. Flux would be the wave, so the vibration, and specter would be the substance. They interact through that third portion, but what I'm wondering is how time is related to this, in the sense that what you perceive is always the present moment in your external vision, but thoughts can happen way faster than actions can happen. So there seems to be a sort of time difference between the mind and the matter. And there's some evidence in science to say that, because it takes a few seconds for something in reality to be perceived by the mind, which has to be able to be fast enough to then react to something that already happened. So it's sort of like mind and matter are separate times of existence, and for that reason it would explain a necessity for some sort of meeting ground between the two, where the first time and the second time meet and cross each other's interaction. But I'm not sure where I'm going with this. It's mostly a brainstorm and a thinking, or like a meditation on the systems we've created. Most of what we've discussed so far with physicality, or within this universe that we're exploring. Because, believe it or not, this is one interpretation, and you can actually find other ones. This is the physical portion, which is where the whole mass-related stuff took place, and heat and echo affect those things like that, and are related to support and to mass and the like. We've just started discussing the mental side of this effect, which is the red mind portion, because it's relevant to what we've been doing before. And this would be the deep related stuff and the yellow static. So, if we advance more information on the red mind, we may then be able to touch on the interaction between red mind and the outside world. But as you can see, we've just begun to touch on that. So I'm going to avoid how this works, but I'm only bringing it up because I feel like we'll have enough time to make the relevance, and I will probably just absorb this information and add it to the rest of the macro universe that cluster of multiverses that I've created. This one doesn't include other worlds, but they do sometimes contain more than one universe. Anyways, I'll be back. Organizing it this way, you can see that sound and light have a different effect on perception and matter. Sound creates a focus and a color. Light and sound. Well, it's a confusing table, and that one is even worse. And I don't know why I did that, because it just made things more complicated. That would be like utilizing them in different ways, but this is actually more clear on how you can use the very limiting properties of sound and light on matter and mind. In matter, sound creates echoes and heat. I mean, the table makes it more evident than my explanation, because it's one of those kinds of tables that are hard to explain and usually used for genetics, but not like this. This shows, for the most part, that mind and matter are not the same. They are not, they don't behave identically. And for that reason, it is likely that the haze that's visible is more relevant to the mind than to the reality of it. But I think the two come in tandem, because I can do that, and you can see a line between my fingers, and it sort of remains there, which I think is part of its properties. But yeah, we'll be back. Another interesting feature of the mind is that it can utilize both. While the matter can only utilize matter, the mind can use both its perception and matter can only use matter. So, like, without perception, there is no way for matter to have any knowledge of perceptive related things with light and sound, which is odd, because we get those perceptive things from matter. So the mind and matter are confusing, but yeah, it's just a weird gimmick, but it's relevant to the way the mind works in relation to the body and thus the external world. That right here, because it can use both, is actually why I suspect this haze has an effect that isn't perceivable in the objective, like this stuff, the speaker, but is perceivable in the or is affected by the less visible static compared to the thing like this, because the mind has a perceptive ability and the matter does not. So its only interaction is through what I've been calling before the self, which we'll get into eventually. But I think that mind has a property, a natural property as well. So it's a lot like matter in that it just behaves as it does, while a self, like a person, is able to control both. So it becomes very confusing to organize, and that's why I'm focusing on this portion first, and then we'll move on to that. I'm repeating myself, but I want to note that animals, like squirrels and cats, hey Jet, her name is Jet, they have a different brain, so their behavior and what they're able to attain in knowledge and behavior is based both off of what their mind captures and what their body can do. Like she can move her tail and I can't because I don't have a tail. That makes you better, doesn't it, Jet? Yeah. Alright. And that's why... Okay, that hair is bothering me. Ow. That's why the mind is sort of like a Wi-Fi. It's not a visible substance. Instead, it's a permeated energy of some sort, which the brain captures and stores as memory in physicality. And it captures it through coincidental effects of connection in its brain, which are not directly related to the mind or the self that interacts with that on a at least physical appearance as a predictable set of coincidental changes, while the mind is mostly a chaotic mess. And they aren't the same because perception and physicality don't match. And thus, I will finish the video here, and then we will get into how you can use physicality to manipulate physicality using light and sound. So I'll be back, or at least an attempt to, because I still don't know what I'm doing.